So our next presenter is Gary Hallmark. Gary is a well-known decision modeling expert. He was the main force behind DMN Phi language. He is an implementer of Oracle DMN engine. This year, Gary will share his experience with generating a relatively complex decision model using ChatGPT, and hopefully he will also discuss how such a generator may coexist with DMN-like decision managers. Gary, please take over.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I've got a lot of weird noise coming in here, but let me just continue. So yeah, as Jacob was saying, this is an interesting year, going from 0 to 1, where last year the LLM technology, nobody had heard of it, and now everybody's going to be talking about it. Unfortunately, I'm no exception. I'll be talking about it as well. Let me advance my slide. So the plan for my talk is I'm going to repeat myself. Okay, I'm going to have 7 or 8 prompts to generate, each one to generate a decision from the well-known Chapter 11 loan approval decision model that's been in the DMN spec, ever since 1.0. I'm going to do it in 2 different ways. First, I will have an initial prompt that will ask it for every decision that I prompt it with later to generate a Python function. And then I will do it a second way, asking it to generate instead a JSON instance that can be used to input into Oracle's DMN tool. And then we'll have hopefully plenty of time for discussion at the end. And here are some of the discussion points just by way of preview. So first, let's look at the Python case. ChatGPT actually knows a lot about Python. And if you use the GPT-4, there's a new feature that came out a couple of months ago called Code Interpreter. And here I am going to give it a prompt. Oh, sorry. Here I'm going to give it a prompt, initially just to ask it to repeat the prompts I give it, because all the prompts I give it are in Markdown, and that will allow it to be formatted.
Okay.
And so the very first prompt here is I'm going just to give it the definition of a graph. This is a decision graph corresponding to the strategy decision for the loan approval in Chapter 11. I'll just give it names for the input nodes, name for the decision nodes, and tell it what the edges are. Then I'll give it the instruction to do 2 things for me. First, to draw it so that we have our DRD, and then second, to create a function composition based on this graph, and that will serve actually as the decision service. So it's generated the graph. It's a little small here. We'll see it bigger later. You may notice that it's maybe upside down. And so for our purposes here, possibly a more interesting thing is that it's able to generate the strategy service by just treating each of the decision nodes as an invocation and the edges as the argument list. It understands that with just the very simple prompt I gave it. And here's sort of a peek at the Python code that it generates. You may notice the monthly installment and affordability. We'll see these decisions several times in this hour. And I say, oh, by the way, your diagram looks upside down. It's very apologetic, and it's very polite, very nice to work with. And it turns the diagram back right side up for us, where the strategy node is on, the strategy decision is on top, and the input data are the ovals below.
Gary, can I interrupt you for a second? You said
yes.
graph, Did you define the relationship between different entities, or it was done automatically?
All I did was give it the graph, meaning so that it gives the relationship, because the nodes are the decisions and the inputs, and the edges are the requirements.
Okay.
Right. So that is, so it's created the, it created a picture for us, which is kind of cool. And it's created this function composition function, and it's not trying to test that yet because it's not complete. So it's actually, we've actually told it now, get ready for a bunch of prompts, each one defining a decision, and I want a function out of that. So we'll go top down here, and we'll start with strategy. And as I mentioned, I'm giving Markdown here, so it remembers what I ask it to do, to repeat the prompt but formatted. So here's the decision table for strategy, right? It takes eligibility and bureau call type as inputs and produces an output. And it's fairly quickly generated the Python code for this, and you can see it's a bunch of if then else's, as you might expect for this particular decision table. Now we'll move on to the bureau call type, and we're just going to go through. There's 7 of them, but we'll go through pretty quickly. They're start off pretty simple decision tables, so it's not too much of a challenge. Then they get a little more complex as we get into more arithmetic expressions. So again, you can click on the show work, and it will show you what it's being done, what's kind of being done behind the scenes. So we've created it's calling them decision functions because we call them decisions, and we told them to generate a function. So this is another decision table with a lot of don't cares, and it's able to understand what that means. Here is the pre-bureau risk category, which is just a slightly, there's 8 rules here, I think. And this is using so one input is Boolean, the other is a number, and it's using the range. But if you look here, you'll see that the first 4 rules are actually using the DMN range. Then I decided just to play around and give it, just an ad hoc description of a range. And, it doesn't really know DMN, so it's actually happy to accept either one. Here it's just parroting out what we told it, so it's giving the exact same thing. And again, it's going to generate the Python code for that. And this is basically a recording in real time. This is about how long it takes it to generate. This is the scorecard, and instead of giving it a decision table markup, I just gave it sort of here's the 3 categories, and here are the partial scores. Make a scorecard, and it understands what I mean. And here's just reformatting the prompt, and thinks about it for a little bit. And when we show the work, you'll again just see a Python function that computes each of the 3 partial scores based on the criteria. It's even using lookup tables for extra speed, and then just returns the sum of the age, marital, and employment score.
Gary, if you don't mind, I will interrupt again because you do it too quickly. You said you prompted that this is a scorecard. If you did not do it, would it generate still the same table, or it was essential?
That's a good question. I didn't try all the different possibilities of this. I just thought, scorecard would be sort of a generally understood term, and it understood it without really any further clarification.
So, concept of scorecard is already in LLM for GPT-4.
Well, it's in the world, right? And it's somewhere on the internet, and ChatGPT has read it all, I guess, right? Is the way to think about that. Here is a slightly more ambitious example. This is actually what we'll talk about a little bit, like being on the edge of the possible, right? Of the boundaries of the possible. I was not able to get this to work until fairly recently, a recent upgrade of the ChatGPT that gave the code interpreter. because this requires, a very big JSON schema, right, to account for all of the arithmetic plus the decision tables. And, you need this notion of a context so that it can break apart these pieces. But you don't have to say any of that to the Python generation. It's just, okay, I give it these steps and it knows, okay, that the decision table is simple, and it just makes a lookup for that, and it understands about arithmetic, and so it's able to easily generate the Python code for this example. Where it'll get more interesting, I think, is when we move to the JSON case. Here again, monthly installment. I think this is our last one. I like when I told it to reformat my input, that it gives me a nice looking, mathematical equation. But again, it just results in the Python function for the monthly installment. And so I believe that's all of our decisions. And so now the drum roll for this particular segment is I just tell it, okay, now that we've created all the functions needed for the strategy service, remember that's what we asked it to create at the very beginning when we gave it the graph. We said, create the, give me a picture of it and give me a function composition. Please create 5 tests and report the results, right? So it's going to think about that for a little bit. And I was kind of curious, I think, about, what it's working on here. So, go and click on the show work, and, sure enough, it's busy generating 5 test cases with plausible looking input data. And it's hazarding a guess as to what the answer is supposed to be, right? And once it's generated these 5 tests, it's going to actually invoke the strategy service that was the first function that's been completed by all of the decisions that we have generated so far. And this will be a common thing we'll see in the next section, but it's made a mistake. The function doesn't work, right? The arguments aren't lining up. But it's able to know so much about Python that it's able to understand what it did wrong. And it's fixing it, and it's going to rerun the test again. And this will be a theme that we'll see several times. This generate and test has just been a wonderful solution to the kind of the hallucination problem, at least in this programming field. So here it's run the tests. It's giving you a report, and cheerfully asking if there's anything else we can do. And so that's pretty cool, right? We didn't write a single line of code, and we've got not just one decision, but in fact, the entire strategy service has been implemented for us, but it's only existing in this ChatGPT session. So what we need to do now is think about how to deploy it. So the first step, I'm just going to ask to prepare all of that code into a single file and give me a link to download it. And so here it is. It's again in its own sort of little pokey, one token at a time way. It's regurgitating all of that code for all of those 7 functions plus the strategy service that glues it together, putting it into one Python file, and giving me a link to download it, right? And so what else do we need assistance with? There's only one more thing, and it can't do it, but we'll ask it anyway. How would we deploy this as a decision service? And so we just ask it, and it gives us some reasonable suggestions. And in fact, I've used one of these. I have used the Oracle Cloud serverless function with Python, and then that's a way to deploy it. And then if you put it behind what they call an API gateway, then you can secure it with all manner of whatever the latest security is. You can set up the monitoring and logging, and you can rate limit. And that will work pretty well, I think, until you get to very high performance kind of applications. And then you probably want to investigate some of the other suggestions that it makes in terms of, using something that's, an actual server like Kubernetes or something like that. All right, so that's great. Why aren't we done? Well, as many on this call know, many of us have a lot invested in models, right? And generating models. And so we might not be quite so keen to to throw all that away. So what can large language models do for generating DMN models? And here, this one particular segment, I couldn't resist. OpenAI came out with an update, and now it's not called code interpreter anymore. It's called advanced data analysis. There it is, advanced data analysis. Unfortunately, it's going to lead to a couple of minor continuity problems in the video, and I'll point those out as we go, because this was shot like a week ago, and the other video was shot about a month ago. That's how rapid the progress is, right? So what are we doing here? Okay, and I'll stop this just here. I have a schema which I can upload if you want to see it. I didn't want to put it here because it's rather involved, and you'll kind of indirectly get it because ChatGPT is going to describe it to you anyway. So what you can do with this particular code interpreter / advanced data analysis is you can actually upload files to it. And so I uploaded a JSON schema file, and then my prompt is primarily going to be telling it, here's the schema, and you need to be really super careful and use it to validate, right? And because it's so complicated, I'm going to give it some strategy for validation, right? Primarily, I'm going to really stress going bottom up, build the rules before you build a decision table kind of thing. Otherwise, if it tries to go top down, there's so many possibilities and ways for it to hallucinate and get lost that it may not finish. And so now it's just parroting back my instructions to it. And now it's going to inspect the schema that I uploaded to it. And it's going to, it says it's DMN schema. That's probably one of the comments, or it actually knows something about DMN because, it is on the internet and it's read the whole thing. And it's going to give us a brief description of that schema, right? And this is a subset of the DMN schema in JSON. And it's sort of the scope is just a single decision, and then all of this decision logic. And because I didn't want to have to teach it the schema and the feel grammar, I essentially put the feel grammar into the JSON schema as well, right? And so that's why we'll say that there are several kinds of expressions, right? Some of them are simple, like arithmetic, and others are more complicated, like decision table, context, if then else. And it also knows that the rule conditions are somehow different from just the if then else. And so after giving that rather elaborate prompt, which again I told it to repeat, like last time, like in the Python case, I asked it to repeat the prompt in the formatted way, because, and you'll start to see this, once you start to see it sort of ignoring parts of your prompt, and that you're kind of reaching the edge of its ability, and there's going to be some hallucination coming up here. So it didn't actually repeat my decision table, but we've already seen it last time. But anyway, that's kind of the foreshadowing that this is a bigger problem for it. But it does go through and give us a strategy for how it's going to make the pre-bureau risk category. It gives us the rule conditions. Now, I had seen this so many times that I knew, and if you look at this very carefully, you'll see that rule like 130 is not included because 3 and 4 both excluded the number 130, and that probably 90 is included twice. So I just said, well, okay, what if I just ask it to make sure it's working here? Yeah, what if I just ask it to correct that right here so that it doesn't generate the wrong code? I think I typed this here just a second here. Hold on. Yeah, I said I missed 130 and included 90 twice. No worries, we'll fix it right here. So this is the continuity problem. We'll see in some later screenshots that that the 130 is still missing and the 90 is missing, and that's because I shot this afterwards with the latest and greatest version because I was eager to try it. And now you'll start to see that it's generated test methodology really is what it uses here. It's not looking at the schema and getting it right every time. fact, it gets it wrong a lot. But because I told it to work bottom up, right? It's already got the rules assembled and it's validated those, and it's put them into a decision table. And now it's trying to validate the decision table as a whole. And here it's finding out that there's a missing property called output data type, right? It was in the schema, but it just sort of, imagines what the result will be. It validates it, and then it goes back and fine tunes it. So now, it's looked at the output column. It knows that there's strings. It's added that. Now it's getting hung up on the inputs, right? The inputs actually, it turns out, are made up of a list of variables, but it hasn't quite got that. And so it has to figure out where in the schema that is. And it's kind of getting ready to give up, right? This is a complex problem. It's told us what progress it made, but if you give it a few words of encouragement, or just one in this case, okay, it'll continue, right? And now it's working on figuring out what the proper JSON syntax for the variable is. And it's actually finally discovered that we've given it very particular naming rules using snake case. And the reason for that will be apparent later, but it's to make the inputs and the outputs kind of match up better for when we drop it into the Oracle tool. And it's almost finished, but then it's realized, oh, what's a hit policy? That's required. I don't know what that is. So it looks in the schema and says, okay, maybe it's unique is what you mean. So it adds the unique hit policy to the decision table. Now it's going to go through some really grueling hallucinations here. I feel sorry for it. If we went back and looked at the original prompt, the last line of the prompt for this decision table said, if no rule applies, then the output should be decline. So it's desperately looking for a way to add a default output to this decision table. But unfortunately, in my simplified JSON rendition, it isn't there. And so I have to, ask it to go on again, right? It's wanted to quit twice now, but it's very polite and continues on. And it finally, so it's going to try output expression, and that doesn't work. It's going to change it to output. That doesn't work. Then it's going to say, oh, I know, it's default output, but actually none of those are in the schema. See, here it's trying the default output. And so finally, after kind of striking out, right, again, this generate and test, it looks in the schema and finds out that, oh, none of those are actually there. And so it just sort of gives up on that property, which in this case is, in fact, the right thing to do. And it's almost ready. So it's got the decision table working now. It just has to put the decision envelope in it. And it's got like some issues with the data type and doesn't quite know what properties are there. So it kind of stumbles around a little bit, hits another naming rule. The name of the decision itself wants to be in snake case as well. So it finally figures that out and gives us, apologizes for taking so long, gives us a summary of what it's done. And then it's kind of by this point, and you'll see this, right, when these kind of interactions go on this long, it's kind of forgot what we asked it to do in the beginning. And so they told it to write it out. Now it's asking, do you want us to do that? Well, yes, of course I do. And I can finally download the file. All right, so now we're going to move on. I'm not going to take you through all 7 decisions, but we're going to look at the affordability one because it's particularly interesting. This is the one that was very hard for it because this one has to combine. You'll notice this is a beta feature from OpenAI, and sometimes the formatting doesn't work, but most of the time it does for the fancy mathematical formatting. So you'll see what it's doing here is, again, it's got to do the decision table, right? There's a simple decision table for the credit contingency factor. And, it's hit the hit policy again. Sometimes, it doesn't really learn from its mistakes too well sometimes. So again, it makes a guess, it validates against the schema. And because we've told it to go bottom up, it doesn't get too far into the weeds usually before it's able to come up with some stable substructure and then keep working. So it's got the decision table working, and it's working on this disposable income expression. And this is kind of cute here. So it's like, oh, I made a mistake. So it knew it had to subtract, and it obviously remembers a lot more about from elementary school arithmetic than I do. So it's just hallucinated that the operands to the subtraction are called minuend and subtrahend, which they're not. But it tried that, and then it looks in the schema and finds out, oh, they're just called operands. Sorry, I'll go back and fix that. It does every once in a while, stumble upon a variable and get that wrong because it's got, maybe a data type associated with it. So it adds that, and it's got mostly validated all of the pieces, but the real problem for it now is how to assemble those pieces, right? And so the first thing it tries is it just makes up this idea that, okay, well, I have to refer to this decision table. There must be a decision table reference, but of course there's not, and it discovers that when it hits the schema validation problem. So it actually understands, if you can say that it needs a context to put all of these sub-expressions in so that they can reference each other, because they can't directly nest inside each other. That was the first thing it tried. It was trying to nest it, and then it realized that wouldn't work. So in kind of the very initial prompt that I gave it, I told it that, you're going to run into this situation where you're going to have arithmetic and decision tables, and you're going to need to put them in a context in order to allow them to refer to each other. So it tried, it could have ignored that at first, but then it was able to fall back on it and try that. And now it's finally generated this, and we can, oh, no, it hasn't. Forgot to import the JSON module, so it can't write it out. But it fixes that and gives us finally a link for the download. Now, so that was 2 out of the 7, and we won't go through all of the other ones. But what's left to do is now we have these little JSON snippets representing all of the 7 decisions in this strategy service. And so now what we're going to do, is to inflate those little JSON snippets to the full Oracle format, which is based on the standard DMN, but it's instead of XML, it's in JSON. So we inflate the little JSONs, and then we can just drop those into an empty decision model. And it's easier to show it than to describe it here. So here is the 7 decisions, and actually we'll get to that affordability. I'm going to do twice because we're going to ask it to correct its work. And we're going to do this bottom up. And so I just have a little utility that inflates these, and when I drop it into the decision model, if the inputs don't exist, I create them, and if they do exist, then I just add the requirement, right? So here's the monthly installment. You see the expression that is generated, and it's in a context. We'll go through these fairly quickly. And so we just drop that JSON, expanded JSON into Oracle's decision modeler, and it shows up. And now we're going to go on and do application risk score, and we'll look inside at the decision logic, and that looks about right. What you would expect. It's the scorecard, sort of the summation decision with lots of don't cares, and pre-burial risk category. Again, it's generating from the JSON. We blow that up into the DMN for the standard DMN JSON flavor of that. You can see the continuity I was talking about here, because I dropped this in before a previous iteration before I corrected it. It's actually generated the gaps here with the 130 is missing and the 90 is duplicated, and that was in the original prompt, but this particular sequence, I had corrected that before. Affordability, so this is the one that we had worked on recently, the last one that it generated, we saw it, but look what it's done. It's generated the disposable income at the first line of the context, but it hasn't actually used it. And so what we would like to do, let's see here. What did I do? Oh, right. It was about here probably. Yeah, it's about here. So it's not been very clever. It's repeated the definition of disposable income. And so we don't really like that. So there's three ways you could think about fixing it. You could just go in and edit the generated DMN. You could ask ChatGPT to try it again, and because it's a random process, it might work. Or in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate that you can ask it to fix its previous work. And so we're going to just go into the chat again. And I'm gonna it starts from I'm sorry, I'm getting an echo. This is just the prompt that we gave it before. Again, describing this is describing the validation that I want it to do. And I've because every session starts from essentially a blank slate with this particular beta version, I'm going to give it the JSON that it generated before, the affordability, with the not so clever not reuse of the decision of the disposable income sub result. And so I found it, and I'm just going to ask it. So I've uploaded the schema, and I've given the schema validation prompt, and now I'm uploading the affordability JSON that it generated before. And I'm just going to ask it to fix it, to simplify this decision so that disposable income is actually used in the result. And it responds by demonstrating that it actually understands its work that it did before. And it agrees to simplify it. Has a couple of stumbles as usual, packaging it back into the schema valid form. And so now we have our second affordability decision. Remember, we deleted it from the decision modeling tool in the previous screen. So now we've dropped the new one back into the tool. It's hooked up with based on name. That's why we want it to be, again, very prescriptive with our naming so that we wouldn't be off by a capitalization or something. And now we look at the reformulated decision that it's given us, and we'll see that we scroll down just a little bit, that now it's used the disposable income as we ask it to do. So now just very quickly, we'll just show that it's all of the other decisions. Just going to clean up the diagram a little bit. And let's see, we dropped the eligibility decision there. So let's quickly look at its logic. It looks right. And see which ones are left. I guess there's the bureau call type. So that should be coming up here in a second. We drop that in. It hooks up to the requirements based again on the name. And then finally, we have strategy. Again, these are all generated by ChatGPT, little JSON snippets according to the schema that we just pushed into the Oracle decision modeling tool. And this tool also has a built-in tester, so we can quickly test to see that this whole thing works. And being lazy, I'm just going to reuse one of the tests that it already generated. for the Python case. So there's a number of input parameters. And unfortunately, the result was wrong. We can kind of go back and see why. So we'll look at all the inputs. So why was it ineligible? Why is it not affordable? Oh, it's because the monthly installment was, I think that's like 20 quintillion or something like that. How did that happen? Let's go look at the logic. The problem is mine again. When I took the JSON and expanded it, I neglected to account for some of the parentheses. And so adding those back, it will work. All right. So now I'm going to just, I think we can have the discussion now, although I'm hearing nothing out there. So I'm hoping I haven't dropped off and I've been talking to myself for the past few minutes. Are you guys there?
No. We listen. We hear you.
Okay, perfect. All right. So so this is the part. This is the part where we can all speak, but I don't actually have the Q&A on my screen. I can look and see if it.
You don't see Q&A?
Let me see if it showed up over here. I think it was having a problem. So tell you what, let me just kind of go through and I'll do like a couple of. How much time do we have?
We have 10 more minutes.
Okay, so I'll just go through and make my high-level discussion points, I think, and then maybe I will stop sharing my screen, and then you can see if there's any questions that I need to address. So, you know, probably everybody's had some experience working with large language models, and you know, one of the first things I think you have to deal with is the randomness that they generate. You know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And you know, for me, I mean, it seems like because it's new, it's engaging. You know, instead of saving me work, you know, I seem to be spending a lot more time on prompt engineering than I you know, ever did on software engineering. It's like going to the casino. You know, sometimes you know, sometimes you win and you get excited, and other times, you know, you think, oh, gee, you know, this, you know, you assume that it's deterministic, even though it's not. You know it's not, but it's just, you know, how your brain is wired. You get a response that you don't like, and you go in and you change the prompt, and maybe that had nothing to do with it, maybe it doesn't. But one thing that seems to happen for sure is your prompts get longer and longer, and then as your prompts get longer, you know, it forgets what you said at the beginning of your prompt, and so, you know, you can even have worse results. And so that's you know, kind of one of the hard things. I mentioned this a couple of times, but you know, we all have seen the hallucination, and you know, going back to the prompts for a minute, I mean, before this generate and test, which was added, you know, in this code interpreter, now advanced data analysis, where, you know, it would sort of, you know, hardwired in this loop is to, you know, make sure that it validates, right? Whether it's generating Python, right? It's going to actually make sure that the Python runs. You know, it might even generate a test case and run the test case to make sure it's really working, right? And then, you know, if it doesn't, it will iterate, you know, so if it hallucinates, it may find it, it may fix it, right, without you having to do anything. And, you know, that's, I think, a really a powerful tool. You know, I remember before that, trying to work, you know, there's no way I could have done, you know, like the affordability JSON, for example, right? I mean, I think half of my prompt was pleading with it, you know, to please generate something that's schema valid, right? And it would just hallucinate and just come up with random properties, and it would never be schema valid, right? And sometimes it would be, and you think, oh, what did I do right that time? Well, you know, you probably just got lucky. What's the source code here, right? I mean, is it the prompt? Is it the generated code or the generated model? You know, I think that's a very interesting question. That's you know, that's different, right? it's almost like maybe the prompt is sort of like a like a policy or something, in that sense, and you have to save both of them, but you need to keep the linkage. Like I demonstrated in the affordability example. I mean, do you want to just generate, to change what it generated, but then you could probably never generate it again? Do you want it to ask it to regenerate and hope you're lucky, or do you want it to take a look at what it generated before and improve upon it? And these kind of things are much easier with this particular feature, because you can upload the files to the chat session. And I always felt I was on the boundary of the possible, especially with the JSON. And that's why I was very keen to try the version from just like a week and a half ago, because it actually shows great progress over the version from just like a month and a half ago. So it's moving very quickly. I think I've hit on this before. Why is my prompt being ignored? Well, maybe it's not being ignored. Maybe it's just, it's just random. But this validate, and test and generate and test, is a great, I think, sort of helper for the problem of hallucinations and prompts seemingly being ignored. And this always comes up, right? I mean, should we generate models anymore, or why not just go straight for the code? But I think that's a complex issue. But there's a lot of investment and a lot of value, I think, in being able to work with the models and being able to visualize the models at a higher level than the code. But maybe you get in the sense here, and I'll tell you, it's definitely my experience that it's much better, generating the Python code than generating the JSON, maybe an order of magnitude. And you saw that by the amount of looping that it had to do. It would almost give up. You'd have to ask it, please go on, please, okay, or it was gonna give up for some of these really complex derivations with a complex schema. How far ahead is GPT-4 and code interpreter? What I showed from like what you can get for open source LLMs, it seems subjectively to be pretty far ahead, but this is just kind of a side project, and I can't spend 48 hours a day working on all of the LLMs that come out and keeping up with them. So your feedback would be helpful to me there. One thing that you kind of get the flavor of this when you've been working with, you see, it's so easy to generate these amazing demos. You may be yawning, saying, "Okay, I've seen all this before." But I think the real challenge, at least for product folks, is how to productize this stuff, right? I mean, it's random. You have great results. If you filter out the losers, from the winners, it looks like a great demo. But there's some of these chats didn't converge to the right answer. It just would give up, because in the context window, I think it got too long, and it totally forgot what it was supposed to be doing at the beginning. If this goes on for 4 or 5, please continue cycles. And one of the really interesting things I think about the ChatGPT is, I uploaded a schema, I uploaded a JSON, right? You saw that. And one of the reasons they actually retitled it, I think, advanced data analysis, is, you can upload like a spreadsheet containing, I don't know, weather data or something like that. And you can just ask it, hey, what can you do with this data? And it'll come up with, oh, well, I could try to forecast, like future data, or I could do a regression analysis. I could try to build a machine learning model out of this for you. What would you want me to do? And you can just sit and sort of interact with it, not knowing much about data analysis or Python or anything, and it will generate all this Python code behind the scenes using all of the Python libraries, because Python really is one of the primary languages for data scientists, right? And so it's very good at understanding all of the Python libraries that are used for that, right? Pandas and all of these things, right? Data series and even regression models and other kind of machine learning models. You can just upload a spreadsheet with data and just have a fun afternoon getting it to analyze it for you. It'll draw pictures for you. It's quite amazing. And so what else could you upload to it? Maybe database schemas. I actually did that. That works pretty well. Business policies. I've started to try to do that. Take like a spreadsheet that has a decision table in it, for example, and see if it can reason on that. I haven't gotten too far with that, but I think it's kind of interesting. Okay, so with that, I think I'm going to be quiet and I'll stop sharing.
Okay, Gary, we do have a few questions.
Yes.
And if you stop sharing, there is a question from Ellen and from Jan Purchase. probably let me share so you will see sharing. I will share my screen so you will see everything. Do you see questions?
I do.
Oh, no, sorry. Now
See
it's
my
my
bio,
fault.
and I see some sort of
Okay,
event
sorry.
log.
Sorry, I'm losing time. I should not share this. Here's a question from Ellen and Jan. Do you see them?
Let me
Yeah,
pull up.
I will read for you. Jan question:
Yeah.
How easy would it be to design a test set that illustrates all outcomes, or even a set that is complete?
I'm not sure I quite get the question. What do you mean by test set?
You generate a test. Okay, Jan, go ahead.
Thank you, Jacob. What I was referring to, Gary, was did you ever try to get ChatGPT just to generate complete coverage test set for that small example, or even a test set that can guarantee producing producing every possible outcome to basically
No, I
test
didn't.
all
That's
the possible?
Yeah, that's a great a great thing. I should try that. You know, it only has partial understanding, right? So when I first started playing around with this a few months ago, you know, I was just amazed, you know, that I could give it, you know, a prompt for a decision table and it would generate the Python for it, right? And if you do that, you know, it kind of can generate, you know, tests that are more, I think, insightful for its coverage. Then, you know, I thought, well, there's just no way that it would be able to generate, you know, the entire strategy service. But then I realized that, well, you know, it really, you know, DMN is very good at doing the decomposition, right? So I'm kind of underselling the DMN standard here, even though you might not see the standard very much. You know, it was very instrumental in approaching how to ask chat to decompose the problem, right? First, I broke it into the decisions and the requirements, and then I asked it to generate code for each one. I was actually amazed that it was able to generate the test at all for the assembly, right? For the entire service. I don't know how much it understands about, you know, the composition itself, right? So I don't know that it would be able to work out based on the internals, and I kind of doubt it. But I'm always, you know, always surprised and should try that. So, you know, when you give it one function, it has to generate one function, then I think it kind of understands more about, you know, the parameters in the space and what it would need to fully test it. For the entire service, I kind of doubt that it knows that, but, you know, it's certainly worth trying.
Okay, I probably have to apologize. All other questions extremely interesting, and I can add more, but we don't want to delay another presentation. And I will ask Gary if you can answer some of the questions right here in Q&A. If you just leave and start again, hopefully we'll do it. If not, just copy these questions for you. Just copy this image, and we will have answer tonight. Later when we have 1 hour for all question answers. But it's extremely interesting presentation, very important for all of us, but we need to move forward.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wonder if there's any way to, Jacob, is there any way for you to make a record of these questions?
Yeah, I will send it to you, okay?
Email it to me or something, because for some reason I'm not able to get the, I think it's because,
anyway, thank you, Gary. It was a very brave presentation, and to put yourself in this position, not easy, I know, and thank you very much.
You're welcome, yeah.